Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. A warm welcome to everyone here in the room, as well as to those of you watching online. I also see we have someone watching from Florida. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to welcome anyone who may be watching from the Westminster YouTube channel later on. And David, will you start us in prayer?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here. So let's open our hearts and let us start this time with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we are grateful, Lord, for your abiding presence that sustains and carries and supports and bless all of us. As we gather now, Lord, in this warm February day, we are grateful, God, that the journey that we're taking going forward as we journey closer to Lent. Be with us, O Lord, this day as your Spirit binds us together through the technology as well as the presence of your Spirit, and that we dive into the conversations of love and relationship. And we ask, O God, that you will open our ears to hear, our eyes to see, our heart to receive, and what our speaker will bring to us this day. And Lord, enrich our time as we gather now and bless us all together. And this we pray in your name. Amen. Right.
Thank you so much, David, for those kind words. And maybe I need today's schedule. Welcome, David's prayer we've had. So now, Bonnie, if you would come up and introduce our speaker.
Thought it would be easier if I held the mic. So thank you, Sue. Good morning. It's wonderful to be with you all today, in person and online. Today we will celebrate the complexities of love and relationship in the third age. Research shows that many of us become more emotionally stable, conscientious, and agreeable over time. We will learn about what traits, behaviors, and attitudes foster success as we age in the midst of the pandemic stress. I am very pleased and honored to introduce our speaker today, John Henrich. We're really happy you can join us, John. Thank you so much for being here. John has been listening to people for a living for the past 45 years. Born and raised in Pennsylvania, John is a graduate of Muhlenberg College, the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia, and the Minnesota School of Professional Psychology. John has served as a pastor and a hospital chaplain in Boston, Connecticut, Chicago, and the Twin Cities. John worked part-time at our very own Westminster Counseling Center, the Burnsville Psychological Associates, and Mount Olivet Counseling Service. He also worked as staff psychologist at LeaderWise, providing assessment for clergy and seminarians. John retired as director of Mount Olivet Counseling Service in 2019. But after retirement, John returned to work part-time at LeaderWise, bringing years of assessment and therapy experience to his conversations with others. John has also taught at St. Mary's University of the Twin Cities for the past 21 years, teaching courses in developmental psychology, theories of personality, counseling skills, clinical supervision, and bereavement. So how's that for a resume? Pretty good, don't you think? A busy, busy man, and very impressive resume, I think. And in his personal life, John enjoys biking, kayaking, fishing, and traveling. John and his spouse, the Reverend Dr. Sarah Henrik, a pastor and retired seminary professor, and as you may recall, Sarah was with Westminster for a while as well. We were really honored to have Sarah with us. And Sarah and John have also biked the Rhine and the Danube rivers and hiked in the Dolomite Mountains in Italy. They have 2 adult sons and a 3-year-old delightful granddaughter. Thank you. Let's welcome John.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, get ready for a wild romp through developmental psychology, family systems, and the biochemistry of love, because that's what I'm going to share with you today. Oh, I seem to be stuck here. Wait a second. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start first with how love starts in the first stage. How we as humans learn to love. We go from your mother's arms to eventually your lover's arms. And that has to do with the kind of attachment that we develop as infants. There are early patterns of attachment that lead us to very strong bonds between our caregivers and our infant brains. One definition of attachment is an enduring emotional tie between infant and caregiver. And attachment relationships can be measured using something called the strain situation. A child is in the presence of their caregiver. They're left alone with a stranger for a few moments. They typically get distressed. The caregiver comes back. And then the quality of the reunion gives us a clue about the kind of attachment that has been developed with the child and the caregiver. Children use caregivers as secure bases from which to explore and then return to safety. Think about a squirrel. Squirrels, when they're threatened, run to a burrow. Human beings, when we're threatened, run to a significant person for safety. This emotional development starts over the first year and continues to evolve in toddlerhood and beyond to age 5. By 12 months, babies want to be picked up by a caregiver specifically, and they seek out caregivers when they're distressed, and they're happier exploring new environments when a caregiver is nearby. I learned this personally when, in my first church as a pastor, our first child, Adam, would bring him to coffee hour, and he'd be passed around like a sack of potatoes from person to person for the first 6 months. And then, after about 12 months, he was very choosy about who he would go to. And who he'd felt comfortable with. Attachment then has a role in building our brains. We call this experience-dependent plasticity. Our brains are pre-programmed to grow as a result of interactions with our caregivers and our environment. And the early interactions between mom and child start to build neural networks, patterns in our brains that establish biological set points that could last a lifetime. What impact does the sight of a mom's face have on her baby's social brain? It actually, through studies we know, it actually triggers high levels of endogenous opiates, feel-good chemicals. Positive stimulation will trigger the production of cortical-releasing factor in the hypothalamus, and cortical-releasing factor controls the endorphin feel-good chemicals that are produced in the anterior pituitary gland, and that stimulates the production of dopamine. And dopamine is a feel-good neurotransmitter. So this creates a biological cascade that is activated by interactions between mom and child, which actually triggers the birth of new neurons. It triggers synthesis of proteins, which are the building blocks of neurons, and it promotes the growth of neural networks. So our caretakers do more than just regulate us in terms of our emotional reactivity. They actually activate the growth of our brain through being available emotionally and through reciprocal interactions. This produces a working model for relationships. Michael Tomasello wrote a book called On Becoming Human, and he's done a lot of research with chimps and children. And he discovered that human beings are unique among mammals in their ability by 9 to 12 months to point. And their only goal is to share enthusiasm with another person. No other species holds up something and says, look at this, Mom, or look at this, Dad. We are hardwired to connect for social cooperation as creatures. In fact, we are one of the unique species that have white sclera, the whites of our eyes. Chimps will follow someone's head movement even if the person who is moving has their eyes closed. But children will follow your eyes. And human eyes have this white around them, which we think evolutionarily was designed so that we can advertise our gaze and our gaze direction for cooperation. So even when hunting, seeing something unique, you glance at your partner and you glance toward what you're looking at, and that gives a signal about where to look and where to go. So we as human beings are designed, we're hardwired for social cooperation. Another piece of our biology that has to do with the development of this cooperative hardwiring is called the vagal system. And the vagal system is named after the vagus nerve. Vagrant is the word to wander. And it's a bidirectional bundle of nerves that goes from your gut to your brain. And this social engagement system exerts an inhibitory calming influence on sympathetic arousal. And it modulates our autonomic arousal in a pro-social manner. And it really represents a complex evolutionary accomplishment. And I'll explain why. Basic approach avoidance defensive strategies work for non-social animals. So I have a cardinal who lives in my backyard. And I delude myself that I have a relationship with this cardinal because he'll whistle and I'll whistle back, and he'll whistle and I'll whistle back. But if he lands on the railing of my deck and I take one step toward him, he's gone in a flash because his little bird brain is only big enough for either a fight or flight reaction. Whereas human beings are able to do caretaking, cooperation. We can gather in a group with people that we don't really know all that well, and that requires us to regulate our fight or flight reactivity. We mammals have to know not only whom to approach, but also when, how, and for what purpose. For example, have you ever had to work with a boss you didn't really like, but you managed to manage your own emotional reactivity enough to stay in proximity, do your job, and cooperate? That's the result of the vagal system, the vagal nerve. And the development of this engagement system and the tuning of the vagal brake appears to depend on the quality of the attachment relationships that we have in early childhood. Children with poor vagal tone have trouble suppressing their emotions in situations that require their attention. And that makes it hard for them to engage with parents and teachers and shared play with playmates, because they're reacting emotionally and they can't self-soothe and calm themselves down. As adults, good vagal regulation helps us to get angry or upset with a loved one without withdrawing or becoming physically aggressive, without flight or fight. So our attachment styles and our vagal tone shape our working model of how we do relationships as adults later on in life. And there are three basic types of attachment. There's secure attachment. Children with secure attachment feel protected by their caregivers, and they know they can depend on them to return. Insecure attachment, and that's about 60% of kids. Insecure attachment, children with anxious, insecure attachment weren't easily comforted when they were distressed, and it took a long time for them to calm down. And the child is reluctant to explore a new playground and may cling and cry in an exaggerated manner when left with a new caregiver. An anxious ambivalent attachment is a form of insecure attachment in which children show a combination of positive and negative responses toward a parent. That's the kid who, when you come back after you've left them, they kick you in the shins. And They want you there, but they also want to deliver a message, don't do that again. Don't leave me again. And people with an ambivalent attachment style tend to be overly needy. So as this then is carried forward into adulthood, there have been some interesting studies done on the impact of attachment style on relationship style. For those secure individuals, the model they have internally, the internal working model for relationships and for self, is positive. I'm good, your love is good, I'm okay. For people who have low anxiety and they tend to be dismissing, avoidant, they essentially say, I don't need you, and I really don't want you, I'm fine on my own. For people who have a high anxiety and who are in search of relationship and need relationships, the attachment style comes out, I need you, don't leave me. And then people who have high anxiety, but they also have a high avoidance style, I want you, but you scare me. Now, fortunately, most of us have a secure attachment in our childhood that gives us a secure foundation and base from which to do relationships. And the good news is that it is possible to download a new working model if you grew up with an insecure attachment, having corrective emotional experiences with other more secure and helpful people. And therapy can also help in developing and downloading the new software of a new positive working model. So that's the foundation. Then we move into our second age, young and middle adulthood. And now I'm going to share a biochemical theory about falling in love. Helen Fisher wrote a book called Why We Love, the Nature and Chemistry of Romantic Love. And her definition of love is a universal human feeling produced by specific chemicals and networks in the brain. This is your brain on love. These are the neurotransmitters that operate in your brain that are the messengers of love. Norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine are the neurotransmitters that are the chemicals in your brain that enable your brain cells to communicate with each other. By the way, this picture here of this telephone pole, that's from India. That's where we get our tech support from. Fisher did a series of brain scans of people in love. She had people gaze at photos of their beloved, listen to songs that they associated with their beloved, and had them read letters from their beloved. And she would put people in fMRI machines and do brain scans, and to make sure that she was focusing on the specific issue of love, she would have them do distraction techniques in between each scan. So here's a tip for you. If you ever get really angry with your partner or a friend, go into another room and count backwards from 7,653 by sevens. I guarantee you, after 20 minutes of doing that, you'll find yourself in a very different place emotionally. Anyway, she had them do these distraction techniques, and then she did the brain scans, and she found that their brains lit up when they were in love. And the two regions of the brain most active were the caudate nucleus and the ventral tegmental area. Now, I know you're not all neuroscientists, so let me explain what that is. The ventral tegmental system makes dopamine cells. It is a sprinkler system which distributes dopamine to many different brain regions, including the caudate nucleus. And it produces focused energy, fierce attention, concentrated motivation to attain a reward, feelings of elation, even mania, which are the core feelings of romantic love. The caudate nucleus is a part of the brain deep in the center of the brain, and that part of the brain got activated when the lover gazed at the photo of their beloved. It directs bodily movement. It's part of the network for general arousal, for sensations of pleasure, and for the sense that, oh boy, I'm going to get something good, a reward. It helps us detect and perceive a reward, discriminate between rewards, prefer and anticipate rewards. Other areas that got activated were the septum and the brain region that activates when people eat chocolate. So yes, chocolate is as good as sex. So dopamine gets elevated in the brain when you're in love. And it produces this focused attention, unwavering motivation, goal-directed behavior, the central characteristics of love. The feeling of ecstasy is associated with dopamine, and elevated levels produce exhilaration, increased energy, hyperactivity, sleeplessness, loss of appetite, trembling, heart pounding, rapid breathing. Sound familiar from when you were 18 and in love? By the way, I don't know how many art critics we have here. Anybody recognize what that sculpture is? That is Teresa of Avila, and she was a medieval mystic who had visions of God piercing her heart with an arrow, and she's falling back in ecstasy while the angel holds this arrow to pierce her heart. Major addictions are associated with elevated levels of addiction: cocaine, alcohol, speed, computers. Dopamine may be one reason why love-stricken men and women are dependent on and crave emotional union. As dopamine increases in the brain, it drives up levels of testosterone, the hormone of sexual desire. Sexual desire drives up dopamine, dopamine drives up testosterone, testosterone drives up sexual desire, and you have a feedback loop. And then there's a wonderful study from Italy that was done in 1999. Serotonin is another important neurochemical in your brain. When we get depressed, the psychiatrist will prescribe SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressants, which elevate your serotonin level in the brain. Low serotonin levels are associated with ruminative, obsessive thinking that occurs in depression or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. They did a study in Italy where they took 60 people, 20 men and women who were in love, 20 people who had untreated obsessive compulsive disorder, and 20 people who were so-called normal. Both the in-love people and the OCD people had significantly lower levels of serotonin in their brains than did the normal people. So if that's true, why aren't we depressed when we're in love, if we're so obsessed and obsessive and ruminative? Well, the answer is norepinephrine, a kind of natural speed, another neurotransmitter, contributes to the lover's high. And a wonderful hormone called phenylethylamine, PEA. This is a naturally occurring amphetamine-like neurotransmitter. In animal studies, when mice are injected with PEA, they cavort and squeal in displays of rodent rapture. And rhesus monkeys who are dosed with PEA make pleasure calls and smack their lips, which is a courting gesture among monkeys. PEA is found, elevated levels are found in the bloodstreams of lovers, and women's PEA levels tend to rise at ovulation. So, true love, I've found you. So, what are the side effects of this love potion, this potent combination of neurotransmitters that make you feel like you're walking on air? I love this comic, The Wizard of Id. Are there any serious side effects to this love potion? Just one, he says, the wizard says. What's that? Marriage. So, I'll share an old story, and I'll give you the G-rated version. For the first year of marriage, you put a jelly bean in a jar for every time you kiss each other. And then for the next 40 years of marriage, you take a jelly bean out of the jar for the times you kiss each other, and the jar never empties. PEA, where have you gone? PEA levels are sky high for the first 18 months. So those are the times when you say, oh, he's perfect. She's perfect. They're wonderful. It doesn't matter that he's been in prison twice and he's been through treatment 4 times. He's just misunderstood. I know I can fix him. In the first 18 months, PEA levels blind us to the faults of our partner, our flaws. And then, after 18 months, the PEA levels come down and they go back to normal. And our natural testosterone levels reassert themselves. And that's when couples sometimes think, oh my gosh, I've fallen out of love. I don't feel that same passion anymore. And that's also when many couples discover, well, one person has a high T level and the other person has a low T level. One person wants sex more often, and another person wants sex less often. And so that's when you have to start negotiating the real levels and differences between you. And then often along comes a child. So here's the challenging news. Every marital satisfaction study done in the last 40 years shows the first 2 years of marriage are high positive satisfaction. And then it's downhill all the way. And it only starts to come back up after children leave home. And after 40 years, you finally get back to pre-child levels. So if that's true, what keeps us together? Well, fortunately, there is what's called the chemistry of attachment, something called vasopressin. Prairie voles are these kind of cute little gerbil-like creatures out west. 90% of them mate for life. And when a prairie vole has hot sex, the levels of vasopressin increase in their brain, which triggers spousal and parenting zeal. Vasopressin may indeed be nature's cocktail for male attachment. And there are two hormones, vasopressin and oxytocin. These are closely related hormones that are made in the hypothalamus and the gonads. Oxytocin, which is made in the hypothalamus and ovaries and testes, is released in all female mammals during birthing and initiates contractions of the uterus and stimulates breasts to produce milk. It also stimulates bonding between mother and child. So vasopressin and oxytocin are what we might call bonding and cuddle chemicals. They're the satisfaction hormones that get secreted during intercourse. And at orgasm, levels of vasopressin dramatically increase in men and levels of oxytocin rise in women. These cuddle chemicals, they contribute to a sense of fusion and closeness after sex with your beloved. Now, the chemistry of attachment and the chemistry of desire sometimes work against each other. Testosterone can increase levels of oxytocin and vasopressin, which increase attachment behaviors, such as mutual grooming and scent marking and defending a nest. But the downside of testosterone is that men with high levels of testosterone marry less frequently, have more affairs, commit more abuse, and divorce more often. And as a man's marriage becomes unstable, their testosterone levels rise. In divorce, they rise even more, and single men have higher levels of T than married men. There was a study just done a few years ago in the Philippines that showed that even holding a baby decreases the amount of testosterone in a man. At the birth of a child, T levels decline, and even when holding a baby, the levels of T decline. Now, under some circumstances, dopamine and norepinephrine can stimulate the release of oxytocin and vasopressin and contribute to feelings of attachment. And at the same time, the increasing levels of oxytocin can interfere with dopamine and norepinephrine pathways and decrease the impact of testosterone. And as a result, the exhilaration of romance wanes, and as a result, marriage becomes more stable, comfortable, and secure. So that's the biochemical theory of love. Now here's another one by Robert Sternberg, who's done a lot of research on love, and he's come up with the triangular theory of love, that love is composed of three parts: intimacy, passion, and commitment. Intimacy, of course, has to do with feelings of closeness, bonding, the desire to promote the welfare of another person. Passion has to do with the romantic component of physical attraction and sexual desire. And commitment comes in two phases. The first part is deciding that you're in love. Oh yeah, I'm in love, okay. But then there's the long-term aspect of deciding to maintain the love. You can fall in love with somebody and it's not wise to love that person. And so whether you maintain it is the second part. because of this triangle, there are a variety of possibilities for what kind of love you might have. So liking, for example, would be intimacy alone. Romantic love would be intimacy and passion, but not commitment. Infatuation would be passion alone, but not commitment or intimacy. Companionate love would be intimacy and commitment, but no passion. Empty love would be commitment alone. And fatuous love is passion and commitment, but no intimacy. Sternberg suggests that the consummate love is intimacy, passion, and commitment all together. So, one of the questions you get to ask is your triangle balanced or unbalanced? It might be more tilted toward passion, it might be more tilted toward intimacy or commitment. And the good news is, of course, since consummate love is hard to attain and hard to maintain, that our relationships tend to be a construction project. We're under construction throughout our lives, with our triangles shifting and rebalancing as we go through our lives. There are times when more commitment and intimacy is more emphasized than passion, especially if you're working 80 hours a week and you barely see each other, like two hospital residents might. So, let's take a look at some of the dynamics of marriage. And I'm going to share with you some information from John Gottman. John Gottman was a researcher at the University of Washington in Seattle who created what he called a love lab. He had an apartment where he wired up volunteers. He looked at 600 couples over 12 years, and he wired up the couples for galvanic skin response, heartbeat rate, blood pressure. He taped their interactions everywhere but the bedroom and the bathroom. And he came up with some fascinating data about what makes marriage last and what doesn't. First, I want to talk about, before I get into his findings, something called Porcupine Love. On a frigid Minnesota winter night, a herd of Norwegian porcupines huddles together seeking to be warm. The closer they got to each other, the more their body heat warmed them. However, the closer they got to each other, the more dangerous it got because they stuck each other with their spines. So they moved apart for safety, then they got cold again. Back and forth they went all night long, close for warmth, apart for safety, until they found the optimal distance where they could be close enough to be warm, but far enough apart to be safe. And when they found that optimal distance, they called it good manners. Others call it marriage. Everybody has to balance to some degree two opposing forces. How close is close enough, and how close is too close? How far apart is distance enough, and how far is too distant? And there's this constant balancing act that we go through. Gottman found that there were 3 stable styles of marriage that included that balancing act, what he called validating, volatile, and avoidant. The validating style of marriage is the kind of marriage style that you would be taught if you went to a marriage counselor. Somebody says what they feel, the other person restates, what I hear you saying is, and they feedback what they hear. You communicate, you negotiate, you validate each other. Then he found that there were couples who were volatile, not abusive, but volatile, kind of Coke versus Pepsi bickering. Where there was lots of heat, not so much light, but there was also an equal amount of affection or more. And then there's the avoidant style. And you might characterize this as kind of the 1940s style of marriage where the farmer and his wife have an argument, she slams the cabinet doors in the kitchen, he goes out to the barn and kicks the post, and then they come back together and act like nothing happened. Gottman found that all 3 of these styles of marriage were stable as long as there was a 5-to-1 positive to negative interactions between the couple. And that kept the style stable. They worked. You start your marriage, your relationship, with a positive set point in an emotional bank account. You both put lots of good things in at the beginning. And Gottman found from his research that friendship fuels the flames of romance because it offers the best protection against feeling adversarial toward your spouse. Over time, however, anger, irritation, resentment can build to the point where the default setting becomes negativity. And when that happens, when it gets to the point of negative sentiment override, then the relationship's in trouble. Think of it this way. So I'm going to use a very traditional example. It's a young couple, they're just married, she's at home with the children, he's out working. 5 o'clock, she's expecting him through the door for dinner. The dinner's in the oven. She doesn't get any phone call from him. 5:30 comes, she starts to worry. Where is he? I hope he's okay. I hope he's safe. 6 o'clock comes, he's still not there. 6:15, he walks through the door and she says, "Oh, thank God you're okay. What happened?" He said, "Oh, I had a flat tire and my cell phone was dead." Okay, that's positive sentiment override. Fast forward 20 years with lots of disappointments, hurts, resentment, irritation. It's 5 o'clock, the dinner's in the oven. She's thinking, "Oh, that selfish SOB, he never thinks about anybody but himself." Okay, that's negative sentiment override. And how you get to negative sentiment override is through one or more of what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Now, criticism is different from a complaint. You said you take the garbage out, it's still there and it smells bad. Criticism is, well, why can't you? So a complaint is just stating the facts. A criticism is, why can't you ever remember anything? You're a lazy, no-good bum. Gottman found that contempt is one of the most significant predictors of divorce in relationships. With 95% accuracy, he says he can predict which marriages will succeed on the basis of whether contempt is present in the relationship or not. And contempt can be verbal or nonverbal. So a couple would be sitting in my office and one person would say, "Dr. Henrik, so-and-so says this," and the partner rolls his eyes. That's a gesture of nonverbal contempt. Defensiveness. The problem isn't me, it's you. It's the rubber man game. What you say bounces off of me and sticks to you. And then stonewalling, looking away, acting as if you don't hear each other, disengagement. Gottman found that if any of these or all of these were present, the relationship was headed for a downward spiral. And how you get there is through what he calls flooding. A normal resting heartbeat rate for an adult ranges between 60 and 100 beats per minute. Men tend to average 70, especially as we age, and women's heart rate on average tends to be 10 beats per minute higher, around 80. When your heart rate goes up to 80 for a man or 90 for a woman, you get flooded, you get emotionally aroused. It's harder to think rationally rather than react emotionally. And when you're at 100 beats per minute, when I'm on the treadmill at the Y, my heart beats at 100, that's fight or flight territory. So that's when you move from your thinking cap, the neocortex, into your limbic system, the house of emotion, and into the reptilian core, the brainstem, where fight or flight reactivity resides. So when do you negotiate? Not when you're flooded in your, you got to go back here. Oh, there we go. Not when you're in your brainstem or your house of emotion. When you're flooded, you can't think straight. Interestingly enough, Gottman found that men find it physiologically aversive to argue. It's actually physically painful for men to argue. And it takes them 20 minutes to calm down after they're physiologically aroused. Whereas many women are more able to self-soothe more quickly, and he speculates that that has to do with an evolutionary adaptation, that women can't nurse their infant when they're upset. And so it may be that biologically women are better at self-soothing. Chronic flooding then leads to negative attribution and what we call revisionist history. So if you're flooded all the time, then you get to the place where you say, "I never really loved you anyway," and then you begin to build separate lives, cascading and isolating away from each other. So how do you prevent this from happening? You need repair attempts. And that can be any action or statement that prevents negativity from escalating out of control. And it can be as simple a thing as, and he uses the example in his study of two couples looking out at a sailboat going by and one turning to the other and saying, "Oh, look, that sailboat has the same color sail as our friend's boat." Now, that's not vitally important information, but it's a bid. It's a bid for reconnection. It could be driving along the Route 90 after you've had an argument in the car with your spouse, and you see a whole field of cows laying down, and you say, oh, look at that. All the cows are laying down, but their heads pointed in the same direction. Another vital piece of information, but one that asks for a response and a bid for attention. He also encourages us to use what he calls soft startups rather than harsh startups. Harsh startups, I can't stand it when your mother comes over. Not much place to go from there. Where a soft startup is, I'm worried your mom will be critical of me and you won't back me up. A harsh startup would be, you never take me anywhere, I'm sick of cooking. A soft startup would be, I'm tired of cooking, it'd be nice if you took me out. Turning toward each other instead of away, building up the emotional savings account. Oh, are we out of bleach? I don't know, let me get some just in case, instead of shrugging apathetically. And reuniting at the end of each day and talking about how it went, a stress-reducing conversation, actually is a bond-building exercise for relationships. And as I said earlier, making a bid for your partner's attention, humor, or affection. Now, I have some bad news for you. There are two kinds of marital conflict, solvable and perpetual. And research has found that 69% of marital conflicts cannot be solved, that you can't change each other's mind. You know, that old, I love you, you're perfect, now change. And the challenge is to figure out which are solvable and which are perpetual, and to learn to live with the perpetual with a sense of humor. So, for example, some of you know my wife, who was formerly here as an associate pastor. Hi, honey. She is a piler, and I am a filer. And early in our marriage, the piles would be on the kitchen table of folders and papers and recipes and articles to read, and of course she knows where everything is in these piles, but the piles tended to be like sand dunes. They'd start to creep and then they'd grow. And at a certain point I would collect up all the piles and say, would you please get this in order and clear some space? And of course you can tell that went really well in those days. And now I've learned to live with a sense of humor about her piles, and she's learned, of course, over time to confine them to a certain area. And so we've lived with a difference in style, a perpetual conflict that you have to learn to live with a sense of humor. Gottman also found that those marriages where you allow your partner to influence you, and that got caricatured in a Good Morning America interview as the yes dear, which is not what he means. But, he gives the example of a salesman going out to buy, of a husband going out to buy a car, talking to the salesman, and he says, I really like this car, but I promised my wife I would take it to a mechanic to make sure that it's in good shape before I buy it. And the salesman says, what, you let your wife tell you what to do? And he said, well, we made this agreement. And of course the salesman said, well, I never do that. And then the husband says, well, maybe that's why you've been married 3 times. So allowing each of the partners in the relationship to influence each other. And then, of course, learning to live with the conflicts that can't be solved with a sense of humor. And he found actually that marriages that were most predictive of success were the wife's ability to soothe her husband's heartbeat rate with humor. So humor is an important tool in your toolkit. He also found that good sex begins in the kitchen, that women find men's willingness to do housework extremely erotic. I once came upon a little book in Barnes & Noble that was porn for women. And you open it up and it shows a guy in an apron vacuuming and other housework pictures. He also found, sociologist Ann Oakley says that men tend to overestimate the amount of housework they do. And Gottman says whenever he thinks he's approaching 50%, he's usually not. So a major characteristic of couples who have a happy sex life is that they see lovemaking as an expression of intimacy, but they don't take any differences in their needs or desires personally. And that leads me to my favorite old, now most of you here know who Johnny Carson was. I teach classes at St. Mary's University in their Master's in Counseling program, and most of my students are 25, and some of my cultural references have to be updated because there are some figures they don't actually remember. But Johnny Carson used to do this joke where he'd take a poll, he'd say to the audience, how many people here have had sex once a week? And maybe a quarter of the audience raises their hand. How many people here have sex once a month? Another quarter raised their hand. How many people here have sex every 3 months? Another quarter. Finally, he says, how many people have sex once a year? And in the back of the room, a little old guy raises his hand with a big smile. And Johnny says, you only have sex once a year and you're smiling. And the guy says, tonight's the night. So that gets us to the third age. The myth is that older people don't have sex. The reality is, if you check the Kinsey website, the Kinsey Institute, which if you want any information on people's sexual activities, it's a great one to go to because they've done lots of research. Many older people continue to be sexually active well into advanced age, 80 plus. And that the two main predictors of sexual activity are your relationship status and your health. Consistent sexual activity over the years maintains sexual functioning, so it's the use it or lose it principle. One study that reviewed sex research from 2002 to 2012 found men and women remain sexually active into their 70s and 80s, that age-related physical changes don't necessarily lead to decline in sexual functioning, that good physical and mental health positive attitudes towards sex in later life and access to a healthy partner are associated with continued sexual activity, and in turn then regular sexual expression is connected to good physical and mental health. Another reason to use it and not lose it. There are some differences in love after 60, sexual differences in sexual functioning. For men, it takes longer for them to become erect and ejaculate. They need more manual stimulation, and they experience longer intervals between erections. Women have less breast engorgement, their vagina may be less flexible, and they experience more vaginal dryness and shrinkage, which can lead to pain during intercourse. So when we fall in love and have intimate relationships with people in the third age, what's the advantage? Well, we've been around the block and back, and experience counts in knowing what you want and what you don't want. And staying connected in the digital age is both a blessing and a challenge. People over 60 are one of the largest groups now using online dating, called the Silver Surfers. Now, of course, there are blessings about the ability to stay connected that way, but there are also some challenges. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Watch out for the players unless you just want to play. My mother-in-law, who after she lost her husband, when she was around 70, I think, when he died, and around 75, she fell madly in love with a guy, and was disappointed to discover that he not only was interested in romancing her, he also had 2 or 3 other people who he was romancing, and she was interested in something more committed, and so that was a disappointment. But it was also an example that it is still possible for all of that biochemical stuff going on in the brain to happen even after 60, 70, and even beyond. So you've found someone, now what? What I'm going to share now comes from a paper called Recoupling in Midlife and Beyond, From Love at Last to Not So Fast. So what are some of the challenges and complexities of love in the third age? Americans 65 and older are the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population. Although rates of divorce in the U.S. have generally dropped and evened out since their peak in the 80s, the stark exception is that among those over 50, where the divorce rate doubled between 1990 and 2010, along with an equal steep rise in late life recoupling, the fastest using growers of internet datings are not millennials, but the Silver Surfers. And there are 2 myths in terms of the challenges of love after 50. The first myth for the step couple is, well, the dog is dead and the kids are grown. It's just us, and now it's our time. And then the myth for adult children is, I'm a grown-up, this won't affect me. And in fact, it is not just us, and the parent-child relationships are forever. Your parent-child relationship doesn't end when your child walks out the door at 22. It's a lifelong relationship. And at this later life stage, normal step-family challenges are sometimes even intensified by decades-long ex-spouse and parent-child relationships. So, what do late-life recoupled step-families look like? Step-families of all ages are different from first-time families because in first-time families, children arrive hardwired for attachment to their caregivers and vice versa. But in step-families of all ages, there are deep lines of attachment and shared history that lie between the parent and his or her children, as do agreements about money, time, family rituals, etc. And so step-families have to build fundamentally different foundations. Grandma and her new love may not be married. The rates of cohabitation have been rising throughout the U.S., including for late-life recouplers. And research suggests that these cohabitating late-life couples are also just as happy as married couples. But whereas younger couples see cohabitation as a transition to marriage, older couples engage in long-term cohabiting arrangements as a stable alternative to marriage. And older couples are more likely than younger couples to be living apart together, living in separate homes, but in a fully committed relationship. In the 50 years between 1960 and 2010, the number of young men aged 18 to 24 living at home in the U.S. increased from 10% to 57%, with similar increases for young women. So adult children may be grown, but they may not be gone. And a high proportion of young adults in the last 30 years have boomeranged back to live with their parents. And one of the major factors of that, of course, is overwhelming student debt and housing costs that are requiring a high percentage of your income. So these are 5 challenges for later life recouplers. The first challenge is that step-parents are what we call stuck outsiders, whereas the parents are the stuck insiders. There's a long history of interaction between children and parents, and then when the parents are needed and engaged by the children, often the step-parents feel left on the sidelines and even rejected, putting the step-parent in the outsider position, whereas the parents become the stuck insider, torn between the needs of their children and their new partner. The second challenge is that stepchildren themselves struggle with losses, loyalty binds, and change. Adult children bring a history of loss to their parents' new relationship. 50% of gray divorcees reported that their adult children were upset, very upset, or outright unsupportive of their parents' divorce, and that creates loyalty binds. If I care about my mom or dad's new partner, I've betrayed the other parent. And loyalty binds are normal, and they can occur even in friendly collaborative divorces. And then parent recoupling brings changes. Oh, my mom hosted Christmas Eve for as long as I can remember. This year, she and Tony went away together. My kids were sad. Grandma wasn't here. I was devastated. So changing long-term patterns can be a real challenge. A third challenge is that parenting and discipline issues polarize parents and step-parents. Typically, this is an argument over limits and boundaries. Step-parents might feel that their partner who is the parent is too much of a wimp, and the parent might think that the step-parent is too harsh, and differences often center on physical, financial, and emotional support of young adult and adult stepchildren. Why are you giving money again to him or her? The fourth challenge, step-families must build a new family culture in the presence of at least 2 already established cultures. So finding a way to live respectfully with 2 sets of very different routines, habits, and values shared between parents and children. You're stepping into, as the new partner, a long-term relationship And it often makes me think of those James Bond scenes where he's about to steal some kind of valuable jewel, and there are these laser beams everywhere in the museum. And you, as the new partner, are walking into a whole network of laser beams of habits and values and interactions that have gone on for many years. And you may not know what you're triggering when you go into that. And then the fifth challenge, ex-spouses are part of a step family. When a wounded ex-spouse triangulates adult children, they're old enough to know the truth. Research shows it's not divorce, but parental conflict that actually predicts poorer adjustment and well-being in children and young adults. So it's not so much the divorce, it's the conflict around that continues afterward. And then there are special challenges for step families formed in later life. There's the question of estate planning in late life step families. So Tony wants to leave his adult son a substantial amount of money. His partner Sally is hurt he's not leaving the entire estate to her. "I'm your wife," she says. "He's my son," Tony says. And so balancing the needs and wants. Balancing the divergent needs of multiple stakeholders. And then, of course, elder care, something we all have to pay attention to as we age. Who gets custody of grandma or grandpa after the divorce? 75% of all long-term care for older adults is provided by families. So negotiating family roles in serious illness and disability is often extremely complex. So Sally is the new wife for Tony, and Tony is seriously ill. She is exhausted from caretaking him, reaching the point where she knows that she has to get him into assisted living or even into a nursing home. And his children have been distant because they have not accepted her new role as his caregiver and spouse. And so then when she makes the decision to put him into an assisted living situation, the children are enraged that they were not consulted. And then when a partner has died, while the percentage of late life recouplers formed after divorce is rising, in this life stage, the number of step families that get formed after death is higher than for younger step families. And in both younger and late life step families, the death of a spouse leaves both the remaining partner and his or her children with a profound sense of loss. More than in divorce, step families formed after death have to work out a way to include the lost spouse as part of the fabric of their ongoing family life. J. William Worden, who's done research at Harvard on mourning and grieving and bereavement, talks about the 4 tasks of mourning. The first task is to accept the reality of the loss. That's in the early stages. The second task is to work through the resulting pain, shock, and grief. Then the third task is to adjust to a changed world. Your partner may be the one who fixed the roof and who fixed the plumbing and did the snow shoveling, and you have to now adjust to either hiring someone to do those tasks or do them yourself. You also have to adjust to your changed view of the world, and the world seems emptier. And then the fourth task is to create an enduring connection with the lost loved one. You know, we used to talk about burying those people that we lost and then moving on. But we don't do that. We carry those folks with us. We carry those loved ones with us. I still carry my parents internally and sometimes have conversations with them. They have conversations with me. I can still hear my mother. And this involves finding a way to remember the deceased while embarking on the rest of your journey through life and making space for new relationships while still holding love for your former partners internally. So one college student who lost her dad after 2 years wrote to her mom, "There are other people to be loved, and it doesn't mean I love Dad any less." Step families formed after death have to include the lost spouse as a part of the fabric of their new life. And that means acknowledging and even embracing the deceased partner, even at birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and adult children's weddings and graduations. Sometimes the new spouse is very threatened by the presence of the old spouse, of the deceased spouse, and they want to get rid of pictures and they want to get rid of any reminder, which of course is a wound to the bereaved. And so finding ways to allow space for that partner to still be part of your life together, even while knowing that you are now still in this relationship and you are moving into a new life together. So these are the challenges for love and the complexities of love in later life. Here are my references if you want to do any further reading about some of the things I've talked about today. Questions and discussions. And I only went 5 minutes over. So, okay.
As you all are collecting your thoughts, I have a question related to. I know that a lot of the research historically on love and relationships has focused on cisgendered heterosexual couples. Could
Yes.
you share a little bit about how these different models of love and attachment and connection, what the research is showing in regard to gender-expansive folks or other types of relationship?
There are differences in terms of the way in which gender expression can be part of relationships for GLBTQ plus people. But the research has been fairly clear in the sense that step parenting for gay couples is very similar to that of straight heterosexual couples. There was a lot of research done around the time when gay people were allowed to start adopting. And there were arguments made at the time that that would be not helpful to children to have people of the same gender as co-parenting. And all the research shows that there's no difference. And that there's no difference in terms of sexual expression and gender expression for the children growing up in adopting their choosing to identify with a particular gender. So many of these dynamics are very similar for gay couples. Now, I won't say more than that because I haven't had a lot of experience in treating gay couples. That wasn't my specialty. And that might be something for someone else to explore in more depth. But the research shows not much difference. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
I'll give this a try. You might have had close to 100 concrete talking points and details in your definition, if you will, of love and relationships, and all these are interlocking, and I'll be looking forward to reviewing them in Keith's archive video, I guess. So your definition, if you will, of love is anything but abstract. All these concrete interlocking points and considerations and physical things. And then we move to a different area of your work. You're an ordained minister. I was thinking back recently to my Catholic upbringing, and when the priests and nuns talked about hell, they said, well, the fire isn't the worst part. There's fire there, but that's not the worst part. The worst part is being cut off from God's love. And I recently had the occasion to remember that and think, the love of God is an enormously abstract thing. And you're not here to discuss that love today. But nevertheless, do you agree? I mean, I came across our head minister in the hall when I related this to him, and he said, cut off from God's love, that's a terrifying thing.
Yeah.
He said, he really meant it. And when I was a kid, of course, I thought, that's the worst part of hell? Oh, that's all.
Well, I'll make that even more concrete. I think if you look at we are hardwired to connect. In fact, babies who were warehoused in Romania without any interaction with caregivers on a regular basis developed what they call failure to thrive and died. Mm-hmm. We need stimulation and interaction, first of all, for our brain to grow and develop, and secondly, we are hardwired to be connected socially, and that love sustains us in terms of our connections with each other, which is why the pandemic has been so difficult. Because now we're isolating in our apartments. We see each other through screens, which is not the same as seeing each other in person and being connected that way. And so the connection, if you see that social human connection as a reflection of the relationship God has with us in terms of love, if our love is reflecting the love God first has for us, then I think you're right that the fire is not the worst part. Yeah, it's the ice of isolation.
We do have a request in the chat to make the slides available, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Anyone else have a question? I'm going to give you the microphone because our online folks can only hear you if you use the microphone.
Thank you. Building off of your last comment, could you identify what you found to be maybe the most significant emotional issues that third-agers tend to have to deal with? Maybe it's only one thing, maybe it's more than one, but I'd be curious what you've discovered.
In terms of the couples that I've worked with or the people I've worked with as they age, certainly the loyalty issues, having a new partner, and then the bind of dealing with a child who either doesn't accept the new partner or who fears being left out in the outsider position is certainly one that, now I have a biased sample in my counseling. People come because they're unhappy as opposed to people who've worked out those issues. And so I think negotiating and navigating the loyalty bonds between children and your new partner is one of the main ones. There's also the sense of time running out and life review. And okay, I have only so much time left to live my life. What do I want to do with it? Who do I want to spend it with? Yes, I've been fulfilling my obligations and taking care of family and children, but what about time left for me? And I think that's often an issue that people come to discuss and wrestle with guilt over choosing for themselves things they wish to do rather than a sense of obligation or responsibility that they've had for many years. That's just two that come to mind. Other questions? Yeah.
Let me bring you the microphone so that our online folks can hear you too. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's watching television. I don't like watching these television shows where they're always arguing. People don't live like that in their homes. That's terrible. And those programs, and they seem to try to make it funny, and it's not funny.
Yeah.
Why do they have shows like that? Because people I know don't live like that.
That's a great question. There may be more people than you think who live like that. And, for some people, that's a style of interacting. Now, it just depends on how much that argument is then buttressed by and framed by humor, affection, and, physical hugs. For some people, the style of argumentation, kind of the New Jersey, I know I'll get comments from people in New Jersey now. I agree. And that is emotionally dysregulating, yes. So, I don't like to watch those kinds of shows either. Other questions? Yeah.
Larry, I'm going to bring you the mic.
Have you found that in a relationship, younger people tend to be more flexible, or do older people tend to say, it's not a big deal, let's get on with it, or, in relationships, it's all about cooperation and compromise. Everybody can answer A or B, but the relationship has to come up with answer C.
Yes, amen. Wouldn't you wish that our elected officials could do that. You know, I think younger people are less rigid about some things. At the same time, especially the subset of people who come for counseling, they often find themselves dug in rigid positions on either side of an issue that has to do with wounds from their family of origin. There was an interesting study done not too long ago, 2018, in which 1,750 participants who were first assessed at age 16 and then assessed at 66, 50 years later. And they found that impulsiveness in terms of personality traits went down, maturity levels went up, calmness went up, and the ability to cooperate went up. So we do learn over time to cooperate and to learn to not sweat the small stuff. Now, that happens to be a kind of a general statement for a whole group of 1,700 people. There are individuals, of course, who still worry about the small stuff and who tend to obsess over things, and those are folks who aren't very happy. So in general, as we get older, we get more mature. Some of us don't, but many of us do, and that's the good news. Yeah. Okay, I think we're pretty much done for today? No? Okay, I'll pass off the mic here.
Thank you so much, John. That was a great presentation. A lot of information.
Yeah, it kind of overwhelmed you, I'm sorry.
And as Rachel mentioned, we will be sending copies of the slides out to everybody who has email. If you don't have email and you would like a copy of the slides, just let me know, and we'll get a copy printed and mailed out to you. I do want to, let's see, talk about our upcoming programs that we've got. Next month, March 16th, you may note that we have a change from our usual second Wednesday of the month. Our program will be on the third Wednesday of the month, March 16th, with Reverend Elina Simon Tyler talking about social opportunities. That will be here and on live stream. April 13th, we will be discussing podcasts with the Reverend Dr. Matt Skinner. And May 11th, we will be talking about Westminster's art program with Dr. Rodney Allen Schwartz. And I want to thank everybody for coming. If you have any suggestions for us, things you'd like to see in programs, or ideas you have, or if you'd like to join the committee, just let us know. Those of you who are in the room here, we do have cookies for you as you leave. On the table over here, we've also got a couple of bottles of hand sanitizer. If you could use one, help yourself. And those of you online, I'm sorry we don't have cookies for you.
Can I make one more announcement?
But if you come next month, we will.
Related to coming next month, Keith just reminded me that next month's live stream is on the Orange channel, which you should be able to get to if you follow the link on the main page of our website. But just to be careful, if you tune in and there's an organ recital, that is a different channel than our program in March. And I will try to put a link into the chat of the organ recital to direct you to the Orange channel. But your best bet would be going to Westminster, our website, and following the link from there.
Thank you so much. And thank you again, everybody, for coming. I do appreciate it, as does the whole committee. And again, help yourself to cookies, and have a happy Valentine's Day next week.
and attitudes foster success in relationships